as is tradition with many scientific presentations, I like to begin with a definition. So I have searched the literature on exactly how imposter syndrome is defined, and a few points keep coming up time and time again. The first is that it's characterized by chronic feelings of self-doubt and fear. Chronic is underlined here because it's not something which we might feel for a day or two. It's not something which is transient, meaning the nervousness which we feel right before a presentation or an interview may not be imposter syndrome, because that feeling might go away once the interview or the presentation begins. That feeling might go away after the interview or the presentation ends. However, if the feeling is just so chronic and debilitating, then it's one step closer to snowballing into imposter syndrome. There are two other signs of imposter syndrome which come up in the literature. One is, despite evidence of having skills and abilities, those suffering from imposter syndrome are unable to internalize a sense of accomplishment. And three is, they believe that they're less intelligent and competent than people actually perceive them to be. And so the analogy that I like to use is the analogy of trying to make a fire. You need three things in order to make a fire. You need a combustible substance, you need heat, and you need oxygen. If one of these three things are missing, then you don't get the fire. So I like to use this as an analogy for what causes imposter syndrome. It has to be a chronic feeling. Despite feelings of abilities, people feel like they are less accomplished or they're incompetent. And three is, they believe they are less intelligent and competent than people perceive them to be. So it's really a combination of these three things, and not just one or two, which might lead people to believe that they're experiencing imposter syndrome. Many times people don't know that they might be experiencing imposter syndrome. So it's important to have conversations about it, and it's important to find out about it in order to find out whether or not that feeling is there. Once the acknowledgement and the recognition of the feeling has taken place, the next step is to slowly start using some exercises to overcome those feelings. And for any of you here who don't want to delve into scientific definitions, but want something a little bit more high level, here is kind of the 30,000-foot view of what imposter syndrome looks like and feels like. It's not who you are that holds you back. It's who you think you're not. So the overarching principle is to recognize imposter syndrome as a natural phenomenon. It's as natural as anything else. I like to think of it as the fear of heights, because you may not know how much of a fear of heights you might have until you find yourself in a situation where you're looking down from a very high vantage point, and all of a sudden you recognize that you're just consumed by this fear of heights. So I like to think of imposter syndrome the same way. You may not feel it immediately, but as life throws these tasks at you, when you have a goal and you really want to accomplish it, and all of a sudden you've faced the situation where it's a mix of doubt and shock and everything else. It's exactly like fear of heights. It's a natural phenomenon. You cannot say that fear of height is some kind of a bad thing. You just have to accept it as a reaction that your body produces. And the same is true with imposter syndrome. The second is, there are structured activities that one can perform to unlearn imposter syndrome.